You are listening to the Yoga for Balance podcast. I'm your host, Heather Gjerde. Thank you for listening. This week on the show, I have guest Brian Glasspool. Brian will share his story, talk to you a little bit about climbing and yoga, and share his tips for finding more balance. Let's begin with a couple of cleansing breaths. Find a comfortable seat. If you can, let your shoulders drop. Allow your low jaw to relax away from your top teeth. Feel your sit bones sinking into the ground, your seat, wherever you're seated. And feel the crown of your head lift up toward the sky. With a nice straight spine, take a steady breath in. Open your mouth, exhale, and let it go. One more like that. Breathe in your deepest breath of the day. Open mouth, exhale to release. Enjoy this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the Yoga for Balance, Brian Glasspool.
Hi, Heather. Hi, my name is Brian, and I currently teach yoga out here in San Diego, as well as manage the yoga program at Grotto Climbing and Yoga. A little bit about myself is I've lived in San Diego for a little bit over 3 years. I was originally from a little bit San Jose area up north in California, and prior to San Diego, I lived in Central Valley of California, where I attended college for my bachelor's as well as for my master's. Pretty much college is where I first originally started to get into yoga. I first started going to the recreational center for the college, and the first class I took, it was really hard, it was really challenging, and probably like the pose that I hated the most was chair pose. And I just remember after just the heat of the class, like at the very end, once we went to Shavasana, that was like the biggest thing that drew me in. It was really, I don't know, it was just so surreal, so like magical in the sense that, I don't know, I just felt really connected, but also very much free at the same time. And I noticed it was just like, for me, just mentally, I felt like I was at peace, even if it was just for like a moment. That's what made me want to come back almost every single day. So I kept practicing diligently for every day. I would go to that class like five times a week, and I noticed it helped a lot with the anxiety that I would experience on a day-to-day basis, and even as well as other mental health challenges such as depression. And the more time I got to practice, the more I was exposed to all these different poses, other types of breathing practices that also I just started to integrate into my daily practice. And that's where daily practice started to become part of my regular vocabulary of how am I going to get started with my daily practice. Of course, there's going to be the daily practice from the class and what there is to expect, but there's also the stuff before the class and during the class as well as after the class that I tend to think about too. So I started practicing for about like 6 months pretty consistently. And the teacher at that time kind of talked to me about if I was interested in taking a 200-hour yoga training. And I was a little bit hesitant at first because I knew that I could pay for it at that time because I'd saved up quite a bit of my money, and it was all of my money for this training program where I wasn't really sure. I knew that I enjoyed yoga and everything else about it, but having to, or just the possibility of teaching a class, speaking to people from like 10 or 20 people or however many, was a little bit daunting. And I say a little bit, it was actually really daunting just because of how much of a fear I had for public speaking. I'd say for me, like when I was growing up, like in elementary school as well as middle school and a lot of high school, I probably really didn't say more than like 10 words a day. So it wasn't always within the capacity of like, oh, do I want to speak? It was also at certain moments in which I couldn't speak. So it's like if I needed help or I couldn't see something from across the board that I was supposed to write down, like I wouldn't ask for help. And it was also just very much to that I also didn't feel comfortable asking for help. And it wasn't until like really like maybe 2 years ago to where I really broke out of, I'd say that mental mindset that I'm not able to do public speaking. I just started to take it day by day and just really pushed myself just to do what I could and just be okay with the process, even if I didn't feel like it was enough. And I'd say also another big thing too that for like what yoga's brought me is just like a lot of the community aspect. I didn't feel like I had a lot of friends for the longest time, but like through yoga I've been able to slowly build like relationships with others, friendships, and it's just been more than what I ever thought it could have been. That's where it's led me here to San Diego, where I was teaching quite a bit last year, but this year I've been kind of dialing back down and just getting a little bit more focused on how I want to help myself grow and how can I help support other teachers to grow too here at the climbing gym.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing some of your backgrounds. I mean, I'm really appreciating this. We've been working together now for a while here at Grotto, and it's been so great to have you take the helm of the program. It's been really fun to see it grow and differentiate. I feel like we offer some really unique and amazing things here.
Yeah, definitely.
And what you brought up with community, that's actually what brought me here in the first place, was a yoga student, Angel, who now is also a teacher, invited me to one of Rex's 9-something evening candlelit classes. And that was my first step into the door here at Grotto, and I was in the class with her as well as her mom and my roommate at the time, who they worked together at a coffee shop, and I just felt the warmth of the community. And I'm like, wow, this is a place where moms and daughters go and friends and colleagues, and it felt like no ego community. We're here together and welcoming. I really felt welcomed in the door here, and then also in the climbing gym. That this was my first. I had, I think, gone to a couple different places, but I found I really liked the bouldering approach. It felt very a little more casual to me. You don't have to get trained on, getting belayed and how do I do
definitely.
that, and I have to wait in line for this person to help me, and there's other people wait. I don't know. So there's something about this approach and this style and this community that really brought me in. And for anyone listening, I'd love if you could explain a little bit about what, we have this yoga studio inside of this bouldering gym. For you, how is climbing and bouldering in specific, how are these things complementary to someone who might be having a yoga practice as well, and that has heard about this and considered it, but maybe hasn't taken that step to come into a community like this?
Right. I'd say they're both very much complementary in the sense that for yoga, you're doing a lot of like pushing away from the ground, whereas when you're climbing, you're also doing a lot of hanging, but you're not doing necessarily as much hanging as you may think. You're also utilizing your core in different ways. And probably like the most common pose I find myself doing whenever I'm climbing is almost always tree pose, which is like always like kind of interesting, because like sometimes I'll find myself in certain instances like on the wall where it's like, I don't know what move to make, or like I'm not sure what to do. So it's like I end up doing some kind of like yoga pose, like a star pose on the wall. And I don't know, it's really interesting to be on the wall and find your own sense of yoga as you make your way through. And it's similar in the sense that there's going to be certain progressions in the class for yoga where you'll start to notice an increase in demand of your attention to attend to what it is exactly you're doing and how it is that you're doing it and how you're breathing. So when I find myself at certain points on the wall, I remember when I first started out, it was very scary, because for me, heights was just absolutely terrifying. Being like a few feet off the ground is like a little bit nerve-wracking, and then being 5 feet or 10 feet off the ground it used to be really scary for me. But I learned how to, I use the effects, just a lot of the practices in yoga for pranayama, for just breath work, and learning how to slow and calm my mind and regulate my breath so that I can proceed through any challenges in life. So whether it's on my mat or climbing on the wall, I'm able to utilize both of those practices as a way of life. And probably like another thing too is just like I guess to backtrack a little bit, some aspects of climbing that you do quite a bit in yoga is just a lot of focus on the hips and shoulders. But what is nice about yoga is that you do also start to work the body in a different way. Towards for climbing, you'll do a lot of, like I said, hanging before. So you get a lot of what's called like a climber's hump, to where people will have their back muscles so developed where they haven't really countered it enough. So that's where you'll get a lot of that from yoga, for like a lot of the opening of the chest, for like cat and cow poses or any back bends, really is the best way to counter a lot of the postures that you would develop from climbing. And yoga would be a good way to correct a lot of those areas. So that's where I've found it to be very much complementary, is that I usually will climb and then I'll do yoga as a way to kind of just cool down. Because that's always like super important for me, at least even for yoga as well as for climbing, is to always like take time to warm up and taking time to cool down, as well as getting shavasana in too, especially after climbing or even for yoga.
I found I have a hard time doing the other way around, yoga and then climbing. By the end of shavasana, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go home, eat, sleep, whatever you need to do.
I almost find myself like too calm after yoga, to where it's just like I know I can climb certain routes, but I find myself just able to progress in climbing when I climb before, and then like it's even like yoga is even better afterwards, at least for me.
So going back to what you said about public speaking, I'm curious, do you feel from now exercising your throat chakra as a yoga teacher, like you said, you've been very busy.
Yeah.
I know you've been busy teaching and being here and being in the community and using your voice. Do you find that has helped now off of your yoga mat as well? And do you feel more comfortable? And do you have any advice for someone maybe listening that's considered becoming a yoga teacher that's also experiencing the same fears?
I'd say for me, like, I do notice it. It's not something that just goes away completely. It's still something that I work through every day, but it's always taking time to go back to, I guess, like my yoga practice, to where I'll check in with myself periodically throughout the day and try to do it like more than, 3 or 4 times a day, any moment really that I can, just to check in to see where I'm at, so that when I know that I get to teach, it's always that reminder that I get to teach. So that usually gets me beyond that little obstacle of fear for public speaking, because public speaking it's not easy for everybody. I mean, really, most people do face that challenge where it is difficult, but some people process through it a little bit differently. They cope through it a little bit differently. But that's the thing about life, though, is that it's very much a learning process. Just like yoga, it's always a practice to learn how to respond to what's occurring for you, and try not to get too caught up in the reaction of what's happening for you physiologically. I never thought I'd be the person who would be like in front of 10, 20, 15 people and speaking, leading a class for like an hour or like 75 minutes or even like a 90-minute class, which always sound like really like beyond me, but it just took a lot of time. I think it was mainly just me deciding to show up in every moment, regardless of how much anxiety I was experiencing, and just taking the time to be like, okay, this is how much anxiety I have. Maybe like on a 1 to 10 scale, I'm thinking maybe I'm at a 7. So what we'll do is we'll start with alternate nostril breathing, and I'll actually get everybody on that same wavelength, I guess, in a sense, being on that same area for just calming the mind and just coming to practice. And it doesn't mean that I will be like completely anxiety free by the end of that breath work. It'll just mean that I'll have a little bit more control, and whatever amount of control I do acquire or don't acquire it's okay. It's enough.
What styles and practices within the grand scheme of yoga do you find yourself practicing most often?
I'd say more often than not, I find myself doing a lot more folds and forward folds. What I think of forward folds, I think of a lot of self-inquiry. And I know at a place before that I was focusing a lot on back bends and inversions, just to kind of just shift my perspective. Whenever I would notice, I would start to become a little bit more close-minded with how life is going. So lately I've been kind of trying to dive a little bit deeper into what's actually the root of any anxieties that I'm feeling in the day, or what do I feel, what do I notice.
That's interesting. I really like that perspective of thinking of the poses in relation to those grander themes.
Yeah, because when I think of a heart pose, I think of very much like you're opening yourself up to whatever in a sense, the universe has to offer, whatever life has to offer to you at that moment. If I find myself shortening my breath at certain points for class, I kind of take time to reflect on it towards the end, and noticing, okay, well, I wasn't breathing much here at these certain points or for this pose, and I noticed how it kind of affected me towards the end of class. And as well as just even throughout my day, if I started to notice I'd become a little bit more mind heavy, or just heavy with thoughts in my head, I would just start to almost fall forward in the sense to where I would kind of almost in a sense go to a forward fold, just because the body's natural, I guess, reaction is to protect, so it will curl up into almost a fetal position. So if you're able to, I guess, respond when that occurs and you're able to breathe through it, that's what would help me go through certain thought processes. Because it's also not only that, when you're in a forward fold, you're also in a way reducing the capacity of which you're able to really breathe too. So that's where I find the poses that I do tend to avoid, forward folds. That's used to be those poses and chair poses. I would just despise those just because of how they would make me feel. That's where I don't know, I've noticed myself gravitate a little bit more into that space, just because I feel it's calling to me right now to explore and just to figure out what questions are there. And I don't always need those answers that I may think that I need. Sometimes it's just the matter of just processing the question and just having the answer arrive over time, whether it's for a day or a month or a year or over a course of a few years. And sometimes it comes back, and then you kind of refine how you may think about it. Yeah.
I had that same thought about chair today. I was teaching a private class and going into chair pose, and I had this memory of how much I hated chair when I used to first practice. It was so uncomfortable for my neck because my neck was super tight, and my core, I just wasn't in alignment, didn't have the core strength.
You feel really shaky too.
Yes, so shaky. And now it's, I've done a bajillion chairs. So I feel I don't have that sensation anymore. But just being able to bring yourself back to that beginner mindset, I feel as a teacher is so important.
Definitely.
To reflect on your journey and remember, wow, 14 years ago when I first practiced it was like this.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it really interesting with teaching in different environments. In certain cases, I may be teaching to practitioners that have been doing yoga longer than I have for 20, 25 years that have lived here in San Diego, teaching and practicing with incredible yoga teachers. Whoa. Or I might have the next class, or in the same class, someone who it's their first time ever doing yoga. And I think that really keeping that in mind as a teacher, having that awareness of who's in the room, and it does challenge you to stay fresh, stay grounded, stay humbled in your teaching in order to really address all of those things.
Yeah, because that's where I enjoyed, like, where my first teacher, she really didn't like push me to do everything and anything. She really encouraged me to explore my boundaries and just being clear with the boundaries for myself. And I don't think that wasn't something that I had always done, to where it's like, okay, here's my boundaries and here's me acting upon them, or just like enforcing that this is something that I'm going to do. And the moment I notice it's not resonating with me anymore, and it's not from the sense of like the ego is resisting, but it's just me just taking time to open to the space that may not always be so clear right away. Yeah, super thankful for just practice and people encouraging me how to practice or explore what my practice is.
What would you say to if a climber is listening to this episode that hasn't quite dived into a yoga practice, and they've seen the classes on our schedule, but they haven't stepped their foot in the yoga studio door yet? What would you say to them? And then I think reversing that, what would you say to the yogi that hasn't gone onto a wall yet and tried climbing?
I would say for the climber that hasn't been into a yoga studio yet, it's the yoga, just like climbing, it's very humbling. There's a lot of a process to it, and each person's going to be really different. Just like in climbing, some people excel at climbing very statically or climbing dynamically, whereas in yoga you're going to be moving statically. You're not going to always be moving very dynamically. It just kind of depends on the class, but I'd say a great place to start would just go to try out a class and just let that teacher know that you are it's your first time going to yoga, and just know that if you aren't able to touch your toes, it doesn't mean that you're not flexible. If anything, it's more about just mental flexibility. That's the biggest thing I tell so many people, is like, where people will be like, oh, hey, you do yoga, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, I do yoga. Like, oh, you must be really good. And it's like, it's not really about that, but I've taken the time to put in the work to get to this space. And I'm not in a rush to be able to do everything and anything that some people may think of like what yoga is, but it's just like climbing. There's a process to it, and you just have to take your time, not getting too caught up with, oh, you see somebody else doing this super advanced pose or climbing this really hard V grade. If you're not sure what V grade is essentially the grade of the route that you may see on a wall, or the thread of colors if it's, just depends on which climbing gym. But that's what the main thing I would say is just mental flexibility, just being open to the practice, that the yoga is very humbling, in the sense that you're like, oh, it looks super easy just to do all this. These people are just they're just breathing, they're just stretching. No, they're doing a lot more, especially if you're activating your bandhas. And so for the yogi that hasn't climbed yet, I'd say, well, if it resonates with you, to try it out. Just know that you don't have to be the greatest climber. Just like somebody who's starting out with yoga, who's been climbing forever, they're not going to be the greatest yogi. That's okay. That's just part of the practice. But if there's like that fear of heights, like, take the time to really implement your breathing practices, like to slow down your mind, slow down your breath, and just connect back to your body with where you're at, even if you're only a foot off the wall. If you're a foot off the wall and that's not a place in which you would typically allow yourself to be, just because due to the heights, or you're not sure, or just whatever it is, take the time to work through that fear if that's something that you want to overcome. Otherwise, just know that you don't have to overcome it. You don't have to just do it. You just work at your pace. take a breath and just go moment by moment. That's where I find myself, like in certain aspects of climbing where I do find that area of fear for certain heights or certain moves that kind of jar me a little bit. Just go by moment and just breath by breath. Yeah, just being mentally flexible.
Thank you. Do you have a 10-minute tip for anyone listening at home to try so they might find a little more balance today?
A 10-minute tip to try for balance. I'd say what works for me as far as for finding balance in my day is taking the time to journal. And I usually try to journal early in the morning to where my head feels the clearest, to where there's not as much noise from the outside world or people that I live with that aren't, so that as long as just so that they're not making a lot of noise and just kind of like disrupting my process. I usually just take the time just to journal maybe about 3 pages. And for that journaling, I'll just kind of maybe if it's about balance, I'll kind of define what does balance mean for me at this moment. Because sometimes I feel like it changes the process of how I want to get to that level of balance is going to be different. So just knowing that it's going to be different every time, but taking the time to define what it means for you in that moment it's important to understand like what it is. Why do you want to achieve balance? I'd say for me, it's just a matter of learning how to ground myself in preparation for who I want to become that day, who I want to be at that moment. So what I usually do for when I'm journaling is I'll just kind of free write for 3 pages, even if it's just random things that are just popping into my head, and just taking the time to ground myself so that by the time I'm done journaling, I'll usually just kind of sit in like my chair or recliner or couch or even on the ground and just drink coffee and just close my eyes and meditate for a while. And at certain points I feel like doing some breath work, I'll do that. And sometimes it's just one of those things. Maybe it's just journaling, or maybe it's just breathing, or maybe it's meditating, or maybe it's all 3. Just kind of depends on what I really need to establish balance, because I don't think it's always something that you need this full scope of everything and anything. Sometimes it's just one simple piece of the puzzle that you just need at that moment.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with anyone listening related to yoga, life?
For yoga, for life, for climbing, basically it's just, if you want to live life, you have to take the time to understand what does that mean for you. Just like for balance, like taking the time to figure out what is it? What is it relevant right now for me to practice? Yes or no? And just take the time just to really see where you're at and what do you really need. If your body needs rest, honor yourself with rest. If your body needs to move, to do yoga, then do that. But don't get too caught up if you're not always able to complete a certain routine every day. Just take the time to work with yourself and just go at your pace, and just know that your pace is your pace. And if you feel like climbing up a wall, climb up a wall. If you get scared, breathe. Just like in life, if at any moments you feel nervous, you feel anxious, drop in, breathe, and then go moment by moment to whatever that moment is.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Heather.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciated you sharing all of this beautiful information and your story and your perspective with the Yoga for Balance listeners.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to come out and asking me to do the interview. Yeah, thank you.
And thanks for all that you do here at the climbing gym, for us teachers, for the community, and for all of the people that you're impacting with sharing your experience of yoga and where you're at today.
Thank you.
And thank you to Grotto Climbing for hosting us in their beautiful space. And finally, thank you at home for listening. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to the Yoga for Balance podcast wherever you listen, and do help the show grow by leaving a star rating and review while you're there. You can find show notes at vintantra.com, vintantra.com. Thank you so much, and until next time.